Hello, my name is Luisana Pacheco, and today I will talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. This film uses its setting, characters, imagery, and even camera work not to just portray fear, but to also show the real life cultural and socioeconomic struggles of America in the 1970s. The teenagers who travel through Texas represent this rising, materialistic, self centered new America that was really taking over in the 1970s. And the Sawyer family represents an older America that was really shaped by family values, labor, and tradition. This film will not only make you feel scared, but it would also make you see America for what it was really like in the 1970s. And it will leave you unable to eat barbecue for the next at least 2 weeks of your life. The first thing I want to address are the opening titles. The first thing that you're shown when this movie begins is a disclaimer that it is based on a real life story. I remember the first time I watched the film, one of the first things that I looked up was whether or not the story was real. And even though the story itself is not real, it is based on a real life killer. But this disclaimer is not there just to tell you that it was based around a real killer. This is there to make you feel the fear of this is something that could have happened to me. Whenever you see a movie and it tells you that this was a real life situation, you're immediately a little bit more scared simply because of the fact of this is something that could happen to me. In this case, the director really wanted you to feel like this situation, this conflicts, these struggles that Americans were facing during this time is something that could have happened to anyone in the 1970s. Another thing that is also shown in the opening titles is this news report that you can hear in the background. Some of the news that are told is that this oil storage caught on fire and that there was a cholera outbreak in San Francisco and that there were suicides happening and some violent outbreaks happening. But the two things that really stood out to me the most were the oil storages and the oil rigs catching on fire and the suicides. I feel like these two really portrayed big issues that America was facing during the time. The oil rigs really represented the industrialization of America in the 1970s. People were being pushed out of their jobs and they were being replaced by machines that really couldn't suffice for what the workers truly did, which is why the rigs were catching on fire. Since people weren't used to work anymore, the machines were being used to do their job instead. Another thing that is mentioned are the suicides. The suicides really stood out to me because I feel like suicide is a representation of the state of a country. It really shows how people feel within themselves. But the thing that stood out to me the most was that in one of the cases of suicide that was being shown, was this man standing on top of a building and being told to jump by those who were on the street. This really shows the disconnect that there was between Americans at the time. There was no sympathy, there was no empathy, there was no regard for anybody else's life but yours. This was the rise of the self centeredness of America, and this was shown in that news report. Even though the news report is not real, all of the problems that were being mentioned were very much real and were exactly what the movie was trying to fight against. The camera work is obviously prevalent throughout the entire movie. In some parts, it is quite shaky as it is trying to obviously portray this anxiety and this fear of being chased. But the two things that stood out to me the most were the drastic cuts that are at the beginning of the film. They kind of make you feel out of place, they make you feel confused as to what is going on. And this is done in order to make the viewer feel out of place. These teenagers do not belong in this old America, and that is very clear. And just like how the teenagers feel like they don't belong here, so does the viewer. The viewer feels like they don't belong in the movie with these drastic cuts that are constantly happening. Not only that, I remember when I first watched the film, I felt very claustrophobic as they kept on talking about how hot it was. And especially during the van scene, I felt like I was trapped. Like I was almost getting claustrophobic. And after seeing this picture of how close the camera really was to the actors, that really showed why I felt that way. But this wasn't just to make me feel the hate of Texas. This was done in order to make you feel trapped. The old America felt trapped in the situation that they were in. Their entire lives were being ruined by this new Americans, and they could do nothing about it. Just how the viewers feel trapped in the van by the camera, The older Americans felt trapped in their beliefs that were completely being erased by the new America. A rotten old America. Something that is mentioned since the very beginning of the film is this weird, disgusting stench of rot. And it is said that it is because of the forgotten slaughterhouses. Just how those houses were rotten, Texas was rotten. Some of the things that really showed this were this cow that was very clearly sick, and even though it's shown for a very small portion of the movie, it really stood out to me because I thought it was pretty disgusting how it's like foaming at the mouth. But all of the things that were sick or that were rotten were very representative of Texas. When I think of Texas, I think of a farmhouse with a farmer and a cow, correct? All of these things were sick. The cow was foaming at the mouth. The farmer, you could see that the state of his teeth was almost of decomposing. And this is obviously done in order for the viewer to be more scared and more disgusted of this killer. But it is also done in order to show that this old America was forgotten. The people, the farmers, the people that lived there and that were there since the beginning were slowly being forgotten. Then also when the teenagers run into this beautiful farmhouse that is completely abandoned, and is not only abandoned, but it is also taking over these insects, these spiders that are completely abrasive. The belief that you may have of Texas, of the farmhouse with the farmer and the cow, were things that were forgotten at this time. That traditional ideal of America was being completely destroyed as the new America merged into society. Then the teenagers clearly represented a vain, materialistic new America. Something that really stood out to me was how packed their van is, how many things were in there. That clearly represents the materialism and how much they care about their things. Not only that, when they pick up the hitchhiker, who turns out to be from the Sawyers, they are disgusted at the fact that he and his family owned a slaughterhouse, and they even mocked him by saying, "Oh, a whole family of Draculas." And they are disgusted at the idea of killing the animals. This shows how out of touch this new America was. These people were completely desensitized to what real life was like, and they were very vain. They had never been in a situation in which they needed to kill an animal in order to survive, or just as their family's company. That shows how out of touch this new America was and how desensitized the new America was to the older America. Not only that, I thought it was also interesting how they focus on astrology, and how even though they're in the middle of Texas with the summer heat and they don't even know where they're going, and they also have no gas, they were mostly concerned about the fact that Mercury was in retrograde. I feel like this also represented this new, like, almost spiritualistic beliefs that were emerging in the United States at the time. The first girl that gets killed in a very particular way. She is hung like a pig, just like how pigs get killed, Pam got killed. I thought this was particularly interesting, as pigs are normally a representation of greed or gluttony, and she was killed just like a pig in the film. She was put in the position of something that she was completely disgusted by, because she was completely disgusted by the idea of killing animals. But not only that, she was also killed like what she represented, a pig. The industrialization of America is also clearly visible through this huge truck that appears towards the end of the movie. This brand new truck that it seems to carry livestock just rushes through the road and has absolutely no regard for anything or anybody that is there. This shows how this new industrialized America did not care for whatever was there before them. They did not care for the old farmers or the old family that had a slaughterhouse. They simply cared for their companies and for getting through. They ran through this road. They even ran over one of the characters, just like how they ran over this older America. The death of the American dream In the film, we see a lot of things that really represent the older American dream. For example, the fact that the gas station that the Sawyers own sells barbecue and Coca-Cola and gasoline, which are all things that are very representative. They're strong symbols of what America is truly about. And I think it was also interesting that the teenagers were completely annoyed at the fact that there was no Coca-Cola left in the machines and at the fact that they didn't have gas. They didn't care for what was happening to these people. They didn't care how these people didn't survive without gasoline, or the level of deterioration that these people were facing. They simply care for their own benefit. They care that they didn't have gas. They didn't care about whoever was there. Another thing is the older generation of Sawyers is dead, just like the grandmother, or is almost dead, like the grandfather. They represent that the older generations were dying, and so were their beliefs. Their beliefs were leaving with them. The older American beliefs were gone because of the new America that was taking over. The last part is the dinner scene. I think this is the most representative scene in the entire film, as it really shows what the Sawyers really wanted. They didn't really care for the killing. They didn't really care for the teenagers. They just wanted for their values to remain alive. They wanted to have one last supper like a family. The fact that Leatherface is wearing makeup is also extremely representative as this time, and especially with the beliefs that they had. A man wearing makeup was completely looked down upon, but he was willing to make the sacrifice just to be able to have the last proper supper again. They didn't care for the teenagers. It was never about the slaughterhouse. It was never about anything that was happening in the country. It was about them wanting to keep their beliefs alive. Their beliefs that were being completely disregarded and completely destroyed by the new Americans, just like the teenagers that appeared in Texas. Thank you so much. That was my presentation.